Arguably one of the best feelings in football is a very successful hate watch. And I don't hate these guys, but thousands and potentially millions of football fans across the world just completed a successful hate watch when Real Madrid crashed out of the Champions League. Los Blancos' third version of the Galacticos were very firmly beaten across two legs by the same Arsenal side that couldn't even beat the worst United side in history. But regardless, this result really got me thinking about times in football where super teams have crashed and burned. Alright, look, I understand the term super team is very American, but if we're being honest, it's a term that really applies to a lot of the great teams in football history. In the framework of where it comes from, the NBA, a super team is generally considered one where two or more of the starting five are elite in their positions. There's not an exact definition, as often it's more so just a term used to push specific narratives, but in history, think about the LeBron-led Heat, Kobe's Lakers, and the Warrior Dynasty, contending teams where the majority of the starting five is world class. So when you paint it like this, it's easier to see certain teams in football as super teams. We also sometimes call them just Galacticos or Galactico-like, but really it's a super team. Let's say for the sake of the video, at least 5 out of the starting 11 should be considered world class or elite in their position. And this whole idea of super teams crashing out and burning brings us out to the elephant in the room, this current Real Madrid squad. The Galacticos 3.0 this year are failing hard, but I wouldn't consider them outright failures yet. Have they been inconsistent all season? Yes. Have they lost games to very bad opponents despite having a super team? Yes. Did they get humiliated in the Champions League by Arsenal? Yes. But despite this, there's still a chance that they walk away with the league title and the Copa del Rey. Would that still be a disappointment in the grand scheme of things? Yes, but that's still impressive to come home with 2 trophies. And the chance is slim considering 1, they've been very inconsistent all season, and 2, they've gotten dogged out by Barcelona twice and that's who stands in their way, but a slim chance is still a chance nonetheless. And for as bad as they've been this season, considering the squad that they have on paper that realistically should be dominating everything, there's still a chance if they make the right moves this summer that they go on to dominate world football for years to come. They're definitely currently on a path to become failures, but they haven't gotten there quite yet. Instead, I have a couple of teams that more so fit the bill of failed super team. And real quick boys, if you're new to the channel and enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos, so make sure you hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. Make sure you guys let me know in the comments down below if you think this current Real Madrid team is a failure, or what teams you think have failed in the past that should have won more. But with that being said boys, let's get into these teams that had superstars but failed drastically. So like I said, this current Real Madrid team I wouldn't consider failures, but the same cannot be said for the original Galacticos that Florentino Perez cooked up in the 2000s. For those who might not know, Florentino Perez, who is currently the president of Real Madrid, had his first term in the seat in the year 2000. When he came in, he was solely focused on turning Real Madrid into a commercial giant to go alongside the successful history of the club. Throughout the 90s, the club had managed to win a few league titles and a Champions League, but Florentino was ready to turn the club into a whole new beast, and he was planning on doing so through his Galacticos initiative. Essentially, he planned on bringing nothing but world-class players to Real Madrid to go alongside the excellent homegrown talent that they already had, all in an effort to not only increase the commerciality of the club, but also just to simply win more. In his first few years at the club from 2000 to 2003, he would bring in guys like Luis Figo from rivals Barcelona, Zidane, and Ronaldo Nazario to play alongside guys like Casillas, Roberto Carlos, Guti, Raúl, Fernando Morientes, and Claude Makalele. And granted, these first few years would be good as they would secure 2 out of 3 La Liga titles and 1 Champions League, but this is where we have to start considering it a failure. And of course, failure is relative, but for how this team would end up panning out, it's hard not to consider it such. Because overall, the Galacticos initiative would span all the way to 2006, up until when Perez had to resign from the club. And if 2000 to 2003 was relatively successful, from 2003 to the end of the 2006-2007 season, this Madrid side would only win 1 La Liga and 1 Supercopa de España, meaning that the 7-year period where the Galacticos were active and were a thing, they would win just 3 La Ligas and only 1 Champions League. Only 3 La Ligas for a team that was meant to be entirely dominant is already a little bit shaky, especially considering they lost out to Barcelona and to Valencia, but just 1 Champions League title in that period for that team that was supposed to be built to be the most dominant force in world football was just outright embarrassing. Mind you, during this period, other names that would join the club included the likes of David Beckham, Michael Owen, Robinho, Sergio Ramos, Ruud van Nistelrooy, and Cannavaro. But yet, despite all this talent, only 3 La Ligas in 7 years, which all came in a 3-year span, and just 1 Champions League. Like, that's just not good enough for what this team was supposed to be and how it was being built. And really, there was a couple of factors and issues going on at the club that just affected everything. For example, example, Perez would meddle too much in the ongoings of the club, they would make transfers that didn't make sense for the overall squad strength, there was too much of a focus on marketing, and there was a lack of emphasis on defensive play. But if we had to single out one season for why this team would be considered a failure, we have to look at 2003-2004. This year, Real Madrid would bring in David Beckham essentially only for marketing purposes, as he didn't really have a role at the club, all while letting go of the defensive linchpin to the team, Claude Makalele, which would hurt them drastically. On top of this, Vicente del Bosque was sacked because he didn't fit the future of the club, and then United assistant coach Carlos Queiroz was appointed only to be sacked 1 year later. Why was he sacked? Maybe because with a star-studded squad, he would finish 4th in La Liga while losing 10 matches, he would lose the Copa del Rey to Real Zaragoza, he got knocked out in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and only managed a Super Copa de España. Absolutely pathetic work in all events in the Galacticos timeline that sent this team in a negative spiral towards the end. After this season, they would continue to bring in more talent on marketability alone and ignored what the squad was actually in need of. As I mentioned, eventually Perez would resign from his position because there was no salvaging the damage that had been done. And because of this damage, Madrid would go on to not win a Champions League for 12 years. There's a lot of parallels going on with this current Real Madrid team and that 2003-2004 squad. So if these guys don't start to get it together now and start to transform the side into something that's a lot more cohesive, they might be in trouble. But that's enough talk. We need to turn our attention to a team that we're really just coming off of. So for our second example, we have a club that pretty much had a decade of build-up just to crash and burn in the span of 2 years. Paris Saint-Germain. PSG was acquired by the Qatari government in 2012. The club already had some decent history, but when QSI took over, they wanted to take a page out of Real Madrid's book and create a monster in Paris that was capable of winning everything and having the best talents in the world. To create their own super team and mimic the Galacticos of before, they would go on to sign guys like Edison Cavani, Ibrahimovic, Lavezzi, Thiago Motta, Thiago Silva, and David Luiz to try and capture that same essence. Good players, but far off the mark from the Galacticos of Real Madrid. But everything would change in the 17-18 season as the two massive signings of prime Neymar and an up-and-coming Kylian Mbappe would change the course of the club for the next 6 years. With these two signings, PSG had not only acquired the massive piece to build the club around in Neymar, but also a player who could somewhat match his talents and had nothing but time to develop to an even better player. But these signings also started the clock for the expectations of PSG winning a Champions League, because even though they had been so dominant in Ligue 1 since the takeover, they had been bounced out of every Champions League since 2012. There was already pressure there and the heat just got cranked up. Anything less than Champions League glory would be considered a failure. Well, from 2017 to 2021, the club would come up short in more and more painful ways, even reaching the final in 2020 and losing, as well as the semi-final exit in 2021, all while signing more talents to go alongside Neymar and Mbappe. For the Qataris, enough was enough, and for the 21-22 seasons, they would line up on paper what would be their best super team yet. This had to be the squad that was finally going to take them to glory. These guys would go on to add Hakimi, Sergio Ramos, Donnarumma, Wijnaldum, and Lionel Messi to a squad that already had Neymar, Mbappe, Marquinhos, Di Maria, and Verratti, while also having Pochettino at the helm, who was still considered one of the best managers in the world. So now having undoubtedly on paper one of the best super teams in the world, surely this was going to be PSG's time. Well, as is common for the French club, things would end up crashing and burning. In the league, they would re-establish themselves as top dogs, which was good because they had came in second the year before, but this was the bare minimum. They would get bounced out in the round of 16 of the Coupe de France as they would lose to Nice in penalties, a competition that they should be winning. And how did they do in the competition that mattered the most, the Champions League? Well, they would finish in second place in the group stage as they dropped massive points to Bruges and Leipzig, and because they finished in second place, their round of 16 matchup would be more difficult, and this was solidified when they drew against Real Madrid. But surely the trio of Mbappe, Neymar, and Messi, and the likes of Ramos, Hakimi, Marquinhos, Donnarumma in the back should be enough to get past Real Madrid, right? Well, in the first leg, despite missing chance after chance and even having a penalty saved, PSG would come out on top with Mbappe being the difference at the death of the match, meaning they would have to defend just a 1-0 lead at the Bernabeu. PSG would feel confident because of how dominant they were in the first leg, and when Mbappe opened the scoring to make it 2-0 on aggregate, surely this was going to be evident of a magical run. But as is the history of PSG, they would go on to bottle the lead as at the 61st minute, a little bit of black magic and Donnarumma being an idiot gave Real Madrid the pathway that they needed to get back into the match. 2 more goals from Benzema would see PSG crash out in the round of 16, which meant that the club would see only the Ligue 1 title that year. Following this catastrophic season, PSG was at least able to ensure the renewal of Mbappe's contract, which was huge, ensuring that the project would stay alive for just a little bit longer. So with the renewed lease, how would PSG's super team do in their second year? Well, to be honest, they pretty much just copy and pasted the previous season. They once again won the league and once again got bounced in the round of 16 in the Coupe de France, this time to Marseille. And mind you, they had also brought in Vitinha and Nuno Mendes this season in order to help the squad in the midfield and defense. In the Champions League, this time they would once again finish second place in the group stage, but this time it was a little bit more embarrassing since it was behind Benfica. Because of this, they would have to play Bayern Munich in the round of 16. And this is where they would once again suffer the same fate as the year before, but this time not even registering a goal and getting skunked 3-0. These 2 years were terrible from PSG. Despite having a prime Mbappe alongside Neymar and Messi, who were slightly past their prime but still operating at elite levels, and the squad made up of some elite talent across the pitch, this team just never really looked convincing. The front three never fully worked as they just felt like there was a piece missing, there wasn't the exact cohesion that they needed, and the rest of the team really suffered. On top of that, the front three just did not press. They had a coach that wanted to play a pressing system, and when the front three just doesn't want to, it makes things a little bit complicated. 2 league titles, 0 Coupe de France, and 0 Champions League was an embarrassment for PSG when you consider what they put this team together for. PSG has recovered well, as we've seen this season, but after the 22-23 season, pretty much all the top names of that super team ended up leaving and put a final nail in the coffin for that specific super team era. So PSG in large part failed because of the massive expectations that came when Neymar arrived at the club. And in somewhat of a parallel, the club that he left, Barcelona, would start to fail after his departure. See, Barcelona with Neymar had a super team that worked. They were a force to be reckoned with. But when he left behind a massive void that they were never able to fill. First, they tried to keep the super team hopes alive by bringing in massive young talents in Coutinho and Dembele, big names that had shown great talents, but players that just never really worked with Barcelona. And when these two flopped, it left the club scrambling. Come 2019, the club still had a lot of the pieces that they needed to consider themselves a super team. Messi, Suarez, Rakitic, Busquets, Jordi Alba, Piqué, Dembele, and Ter Stegen. Were these players a little bit past it? Sure, they probably were, but on paper, for the narratives, these guys were still considered top dogs in their position to consider this a super team. But for the last couple of years, they had been struggling on the pitch and thus would use the transfer market to bring in some massive names, keeping the ideas of the super team alive while trying to improve results. Griezmann and De Jong would join La Blaugrana, and in turn, it was expected that things would finally come around for the Catalan club as they were hoping to retain their La Liga title and return to form in the Champions League. So how did they do? Well, for the 19-20 season, it was an absolute mess. Really, the front three of Messi, Suarez, and Griezmann just never worked because despite all three being great on paper, they just did not complement each other's playstyles. They never flowed at all and hardly looked threatening, and ask most Barcelona fans and they'll tell you that it was really just Messi carrying this team into whatever success they did have. Because additionally, they never really had good managers around this time, and from a tactical standpoint, it was a mess. They would come up short in La Liga by 6 points as Real Madrid claimed victory there. They would get bounced out in the Copa del Rey in the quarterfinals to Atletico Bilbao, and would get humiliated in the Champions League quarterfinals 8-2 on aggregate by Bayern Munich. Again, this team had already been struggling in Europe, and they tried to address issues by bringing in Griezmann and De Jong, to create a final iteration of the super team while they still had the guys like Messi, Suarez, Busquets, and such, especially in the world post Neymar, and it all just kind of blew up in their face. And in the following season, things would not fare that much better, if we're being honest, because in the preparation for that season, the club would actually lose Suarez and Rakitic, who were 2 good pieces that they still needed. They would keep pretty much every other piece that I mentioned earlier and also added Miralem Pjanic to the side, but nothing really improved. They'd finished 3rd place in La Liga, they managed to at least secure themselves the Copa del Rey, but this time they were slaughtered in the round of 16 in the Champions League to a Neymar and Mbappe led PSG. An absolute clown show from top to bottom, and really that was the end of this short-lived Griezmann, Messi, Suarez super team that really only lasted 1 season. Really, the 2020-2021 season was just an aftershock of the 19-20 season. In 2021, Griezmann would go back on loan to Atletico Madrid before moving back fully in 2021. And it wasn't just a Frenchman that left, because Messi himself would also leave the club in 2021 due to financial issues at Barcelona. With Messi's departure, it was really the end of any conversation of Barcelona at all being considered a super team. They were already on their last legs when they signed Griezmann and De Jong. The arrival of those two did help the narrative of them being a super team, but 2021 with all these departures was just the final nail in the coffin until where we're at now, really. Realistically, after the Pep era, they had the MSN period shortly after, which I mentioned was a dominant force, but essentially tried multiple iterations after Neymar's departure and just failed miserably. This period in the very early 2020s is very similar to the failed Barcelona super teams of the early 2000s, where the talent was there but the success never followed. In that era, you had guys like Deco, Overmars, Kluivert, Rivaldo, Puyol, Puyol, Riquelme, younger Iniesta, younger Xavi, who all could not get things ticking and underdelivered massively until around 2004. It's always crazy to see teams like these with so much talent just crash and burn. And the thing is with failed super teams, it's not just a great team that didn't win a title one year. For example, you had Liverpool from about 2018 to 2021. They were going band for band with probably the greatest Man City team ever and came up just short. But they did win a Premier League, which was Liverpool's first ever, and they also won a Champions League. Relative success there, right? And then you had the late stages of Fergie where he was winning so many Premier Leagues, but he didn't manage to capture as many Champions League as he probably would have wanted. And then you have teams that probably overperformed. They had really good players, but not enough to really consider them a super team. For example, Liverpool with Suarez, Sturridge, and Gerrard, they were great. They should have won the league and they failed. But realistically, across the pitch, they weren't really a super team per se, right? It's really interesting to think about all these great players just end up not working out. But just to take it back to where we started, this Real Madrid team that we have now is very quickly on course to get to that point. I don't think they will, but you guys can let me know in the comments down below. Because if Barcelona win a treble on their head top, things are gonna get spooky.